Alright you lots, Wildlife Moto here, and in this video, love them or hate them, we're going to talk about fly screen options with a detailed look at this. It's the Interceptor 650 specific Dart Classic. Shall we? The UK's stunning network of A and B roads like these. This is where I spend most of my time on the Interceptor, flicking up and down through the gears between 40 and 60 miles an hour, and of course avoiding motorways like the plague, if I can help it. And while wind blast is always going to be a factor at high speeds, it's kind of par for the course on any naked machine like this. We already knew what we were getting into. And if you're looking to add a small to medium-sized fly screen, just do it knowing that really the best case scenario is going to be a subtle reduction in drag coefficient, but don't go expecting any performance miracles. There are of course much larger kind of touring focus screens knocking around on the aftermarket, and maybe that's something you might want to look at if wind blast is your primary concern. So before we get into the reads on the Dart Classic fly screen, it's worth giving an honourable mention to this. It's the official Royal Enfield short windscreen. Now, as you can see, I've never actually fitted this to my bike. I got it from the dealer when I bought the bike, but it's never been on because I pretty much straight away changed out the factory headlight brackets for these from Motone Customs, so they no longer fit. As you can see, the genuine screen is perfect for the factory brackets. It lines up with this kind of split design, but of course it's not going to work if you're a numpty like me and you've changed them. And of course there'll be others out there who might want to go for something different from the official offering. Maybe it's because you want something stylistically different, or of course maybe you're looking for something slightly bigger in profile to give you slightly better wind resistance out there on the road as well. But I guess for most riders, this factory accessory is probably where you're going to end up if you just want an easy solution. Now, Dart are a British company. They've been around since the 90s and offer three main styles of fly screen across multiple bikes. So the version I've got is called the Classic. It's basically a medium-sized screen. You've got a smaller, more kind of Street Fighter-esque version called the Piranha, if you want that. And there is a bigger version if you want maximum protection, and they call that the Marlin. But that one uses a slightly different design to what we're talking about for the Classic and the Piranha. So really, I guess it's up to you what you go for in terms of striking that balance between size and aesthetic. Now, I will take you through an install in just a second, but first up, let's quickly get it out the box and take a look at the quality of the components, given that this thing is going to set you back around 90 quid. And unboxing everything, you can see that it is all well packed. Alongside the screen, you've got these two interesting black brackets, more on these shortly. And even the aluminium hex bolts are pretty well thought out with a nice stylish dome design, so all looking good so far. The screen itself, I'm pleased to say, looks to be very well made. This is the dark tint version. You can opt for a lighter tint, or you can go for the full-on blacked out midnight version. It's made of an injection molded polycarbonate, and it's then coated with a thin layer of silicate that Dart call Dartec 2. And apparently this is all about making the screen tougher, just gives it an extra layer of hardness, making it less prone to getting scratched when you go and wash it and things like that. The quality certainly falls in line with expectations. I think it looks really good. And just to be 100% clear, I've got no affiliation with Dart whatsoever. I bought it with my own money. If it was rubbish, I'd simply go ahead and tell you. Now, the thing I guess I'm most curious about is the way that these brackets mount to the Interceptor. This is actually the main reason why I got the Dart Classic. Rather than bolting on via the headlight brackets, as most of these universal windshields do, it actually uses the four studs underneath the clocks as a mounting point. And I think this is really cool because clearly the designers have looked at the Interceptor. They've seen you've got these exposed studs up front on the clocks, which are actually pretty ugly anyway. So They've used those rather than just going with a more generic universal solution, which would be to stick them next to the headlight brackets. The result of this is it almost looks like the windscreen's floating above the headlight because there's no obvious bracketry on the side of the bike holding it all in place. I personally think it looks really, really cool. And as I said, this is the main reason why I was curious to see what the Dark Classic was really like. As you can imagine, fitting it to the bike really couldn't be easier. First up, we just want to put the brackets in place. You can use a 10mm spanner to go ahead and remove the 4 dome nuts that hold the instruments to the mounts on the bike. Just be a bit careful here because there are washers in there, and of course they're just going to fall on the floor straight away unless you catch them. So watch out for those because you need to retain them. Then simply offer up the brackets to the instrument studs and go ahead and secure in place. Best to do it with your fingers first, and then you can go ahead and tighten them later. There's one bracket for each side on the instrument cluster, and you will need to make sure that you fully tighten this to the bike before you go ahead and put the windscreen on, because once the windscreen's in place, you will not be able to get a spanner behind there. So next up, it's a case of getting hold of the windscreen, and in the pack you'll find 4 rubber grommets that need to be inserted into the holes on the side of the windscreen. They're a little bit fiddly to get in, but just squish them and squash them into place, and eventually they will find a seat there. Once you've done that, offer up the screen to the bike, starting with the 2 bolts at the bottom, and just go ahead and finger tighten those in place, and then move on to the 2 at the top. It did take me a little bit of maneuvering to get everything to line up, but thankfully, because of those rubber grommets, you've got a few mil of kind of wiggle room either side to kind of squash everything into place. It will go eventually. And once everything's loosely in place, you can then go ahead, get an Allen key, and just tighten this up. Again, you don't want to tighten it too tight because you are, of course, screwing into plastic. So just make sure you give it a little nip, but not too much. And that's pretty much all there is to it. You do get a set of instructions, but honestly, I don't think you're going to need them. Now with the screen in place, I've got to say I'm absolutely delighted with the look of it. I really think the classic version with this dark tint really suits the bike nicely. I really appreciate the way that they've exploited those little studs underneath the instrument cluster rather than using a headlight bracket mount. It just looks factory. It looks like something the Royal Enfield designers would have thought of. And I've got to say, it looks really, really cool. Almost like it's floating above the headlight here. Now, of course, unfortunately, this video is going to end a little bit incomplete because I've not been able to get the bike out on the road and test this for obvious reasons. This is the way the world is right now. But I do promise you I will do that as soon as I'm able to get out and ride again. I'm curious to know what the performance is like, whether or not it does relieve some of the pressure on the chest, and crucially, whether it's going to deflect the wind high enough to get over and above my helmet so we don't end up with any nasty bobbling. I've got to say, from an aesthetic standpoint, from a quality of component standpoint, I think it's great, but we will find out what it's like on the road as soon as we can. Don't forget to hit subscribe to catch that video when it drops, and until the next one, ride safe.